So welcome. Today is our Move into Stillness meeting. As usual, I can know by the attendance. It's so easy to tell. Don't have to think. So, what is the aim of our study in today's meeting? So, the study is somatics, and the aim is that we can learn how to regain voluntary control of our own muscles. And in particular, what we're probably most interested in is that we can learn to stop doing the chronic tension that is producing so much unpleasantness in our moment-to-moment experience. And so the premise here in somatic exploration, at least as I presented, is based largely or inspired largely by the work of Thomas Hanna, and he proposed this term sensory motor amnesia as a description of what the primary problem is that can be resolved through somatic awareness. And so sensory motor amnesia is, as the term describes, it is when we have lost the conscious awareness of the sensory data and the motor control of various parts of the body. So the resting, so there's this notion of resting tone of the muscle, but this is as the term is typically used, it's well, the term actually is, it's sort of, I would say it's an oxymoron, if that's the correct term to use there, because there should be no tone at rest. So tone means tension. And so there's a popular myth in modern medicine and physiotherapy and body work of various sorts that there is something called resting tone. There's just a resting tension in the muscles, but obviously if the muscle is at rest, there should be no tension. And in fact, that should be true. So if we think that we're at rest and there is tension in any of the muscles, then we are not actually at rest. I mean, just by definition. And so what's happening is that the muscles that are not completely relaxed, that have this quote unquote resting tonus, are not at rest. They are to some degree active, and that activity is producing feedback and also biochemical processes that result in unwanted symptoms. So if just at a biochemical level, when a muscle is tense, then it produces lactic acid. So if you were to lactic acid is sort of the limiting factor for most activity. So as an example, there's something called soda loading, which is just taking baking soda, which don't do this, but I'm just giving you this information, that's used in athletics, because it can extend it can extend how long a person can sustain the effort. So for example, in marathon runners, soda loading is found to allow them to run for 10% longer on average. And so this could also be used presumably in weightlifting, because lactic acid buildup is what produces the fatigue and the soreness that prevents people from continuing with their activities. So the baking soda, again, don't do this. I'm just giving this as information, but not as a prescription. So please don't do it. But because done incorrectly, it could be dangerous. But the theory behind how it works is that because the baking soda has a high pH, it's alkaline, it neutralizes the lactic acid. Because if you know anything about your chemistry, you know that alkaline and acid can neutralize one another. It's like, if you take baking soda and vinegar and put them in a bottle, you get the volcano thing. So this lactic acid is being generated because of the muscle being constantly utilized, even though you don't know that you're doing it. So that lactic acid can result in pain and soreness. So if you have chronic pain or soreness, there's a significant possibility that it's due to this lactic acid buildup because the muscle's never actually at rest. But that's just one of many mechanisms by which the chronic tension in the muscles can feedback and produce undesirable symptoms. So symptoms are not limited exclusively to pain, but you could have, obviously pain is one of them, soreness, fatigue, but also because all of the experiences that we have are products of the nervous system. The nervous system is free to interpret the information in whatever way it wants. Now, the premise of sensory motor amnesia is that, as I've already pointed out, that you have forgotten consciously what's going on. Not only have you've forgotten how to voluntarily control the muscles, but you've also forgotten how to accurately sense what the muscles are actually doing. And so you will very likely not even realize that what you're suffering from is chronic muscle tension. And you will instead think that it's all kinds of other things because that's what the world teaches you. You go to most people who've been through the medical system with chronic problems know that if they go to a dozen specialists, they're going to get a dozen different diagnoses. And that's because people tend to be very specialized and they view things through their own particular theory and lens. And so you get diagnoses that match the training or specialty rather than based on an understanding of what's going on. So so it's one of those things. It's like this. I don't want to use the word epidemic because that's not the right term, but it's the proportions are huge. Almost everybody, well, not almost everybody, I would say, well, I'll just say almost everybody in the modern world is suffering from some sensory motor amnesia of some degree or another. So some people have very high degrees of sensory motor amnesia and some people have very low degrees, but it's just part of what it is to be a modern human. However, the good news, so that all sounds terrible because, and it would be terrible if there wasn't a solution. But the good news is that there is a remedy, and the remedy is, it's kind of obvious once you understand what the problem is. If the problem is sensory motor amnesia, meaning that we've forgotten how to accurately sense and can control the muscles, then the remedy is to develop the awareness so that we can cease making those errors. And so the process of somatic exploration is aimed at that, at reestablishing sensory motor awareness. So today I would like to take a look at, in particular, and we'll see if we can get through it, but on the agenda today are two topics broadly. One of those topics is the three main reflexes that Thomas Hanna described, and I'll get into why that's really important for us. And then we're also going to take a look at it, assuming we have enough time for it, we'll take a look at pandiculation in a little bit more detail. And the reason that I want to talk about these things is because they're of extraordinary practical value. So in recent meetings, we've covered some of the basics of somatics, and so I'm not going to rehash all of that. I do obviously have rehashed a little bit of it because it's really very important to understand what the problem actually is, because otherwise we think that the problem is something structural, and actually the problem is not structural. The problem is functional, and the reason that matters is because if it's structural, then you're kind of out of luck on your own, because let's see, you go to somebody and they say, well, the problem is one leg is shorter than the other, or the problem is that this you've got no cartilage on this disc, or the problem is on and on and on, or the problem is you've got, so many things, so many different theories, and it could be something in the bones, it could be something in the muscle, but it's usually identified as something structural. And you can't do much with structure unless you want to go to a surgeon. But what if the problem is not structural at all? And that's the good news. So if it's functional, what that means is that it's entirely under the control of the nervous system. And guess what? You get to control that. Even though at first it seems like maybe that seems totally foreign. I mean, it seems like, well, how could it, if I don't have awareness of it, how could I gain control over it? But that's the brilliance of somatic exploration, is that it allows us to do exactly that. So let's talk about these three reflexes. And I'll explain to you, first of all, why understanding these three reflexes is so important, because it can save you an enormous amount of time. Now, if you were to, and I don't encourage you to do this, but if you were to go onto YouTube and search for somatic exercises, you would come up with an awful lot of results, and 99%, I'm estimating, but in a large percent, that's probably too harsh. Better than half will not be somatic exercises at all. They will be something entirely different, because the people who are, although well-meaning, the people who are describing them and sharing them don't actually know what somatics is. And so they're doing something different. They may be doing stretching, they may be doing strengthening, but they're not actually doing somatics. And then among those that are actually somatics, a significant percentage of them will be so complicated, and they'll be talking about suggesting that you have to do all of these different exercises for all of the different muscles in the body. And it can be easily and quickly overwhelming, because you think, well, do I have to go back to school and get a degree in human anatomy in order to be able to have success with this? That seems really, really complicated, because there are hundreds of muscles in the body. And do I have to have a specific movement for each one of the muscles? How do I identify which muscle is causing the problem? And on and on and on. Well, good news. You don't have to know all of that. Now, some of that can be useful, but in the near future, well, actually, and this might seem like I'm conflicting myself, contradicting myself here, but I'm not. In the near future, in some meetings, we may actually, because there is some value in understanding some of the connections of some of the muscles, but in truth, you don't really need to know anything about any of the muscles. You don't need to know their names, the attachments, or any of those things, even though some of that can, as I said, can be useful. But the thing that you need to have first is the understanding of these three reflexes, because they greatly simplify things, and they will give you much better results when you understand these versus all the other overly complicated, detailed stuff. So the three reflexes, which some of you know, Thomas Hanna called them the red light, green light, and trauma reflexes. So let's talk a little bit about what those are. The red light is a reflex, and he calls them a reflex because they are there's something that's inbuilt into the human nervous system. Not just humans, actually. It turns out most animals, to some degree, have these reflexes, and even some non-animals have these reflexes. So some non-animal living beings have these some of these reflexes. So the red light reflex is not, like I said, it's not learned. It's just automatic, and it's demonstrated in newborn infants. So it's the reflex that actually, for human infants, it's the reflex that allows the baby to nurse at the breast. And so it's obviously very important, but it also is it's a self-protective withdrawal reflex. So for any being who is incapable of running away or fighting, then when there's a threat, this reflex can be life-saving because it is the best bet for survival that the organism has. So what does that look like? Well, it looks like moving backward in space and contracting the front of the body. So you can, and I would encourage you to actually feel what that is like. So you can shorten the front side of the body. So you could place one hand at the bottom of the breastbone and at the middle of the chest, and at the base of the middle of the chest, and then another at the pubic bone, if you can find that. And those are going to come closer together while the lower back, or the whole backside, rounds. Then the shoulders also roll in. So you can do that. So you've got shoulders rolled forward, and you've shortened the front side of the body. And then the head actually comes up. So the back of the neck contracts. Now notice, in this position, you're not going to feel very comfortable. You're not going to feel that you can breathe. In fact, let's come out of that slowly, because that's so uncomfortable. So, but you can't, in that position, you can't breathe in a natural and free and comfortable way, because you can't actually allow the abdomen to move outward and downward in order to accommodate the free movement of the thoracic diaphragm, which should be used for natural breathing. So breathing becomes shallow. Breathing becomes moves to the upper part of the body, to the chest. The back of the neck becomes uncomfortable, and then everything is going to come wrap around into the front of the head. So a lot of headaches are due to red light posture. Shallow breathing is often due to red light posture. Digestive problems can be due to red light posture. This is also, of course, what people now are all big on: head forward posture, because you just notice it for yourself. That's what happens. So this posture is, as I said, it's a withdrawal posture. So it is provoked by fear and apprehension. So in a society that is run by fear, you're going to have people who have a lot of red light posture. So when Thomas Hanna was alive, and when he was developing this field of somatics, he identified that the primary reflex that was active in Western culture is a green light posture, which we haven't talked about yet. But turns out that was a different time, and things have changed since then. That was a go, 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 be productive. And now it's much more about fear. And there's another component to it, which is that it's not just about although the cultural influence is enormous and should not be dismissed, but that's not the only influence. The other influence is habit and what it is that what our activities are. So if you consider in the 1960s and 1970s, when in 80s, when Hannah was really developing this work, in the United States where he was, there was a much more of a culture of activity, doing, and productivity, and not as many people sitting at desks. But today, of course, that's changed. Most people are sitting a lot. And so if you think about what happens if you sit at a desk and you're reaching for a keyboard and a mouse and you're looking at a screen, well, what is that? That's a red light posture. Or if you're sitting, on a couch and you're sucked into the couch or the chair, or the way that cars are designed, the car seats, all of that is red light posture. So all of that encourages the habit of red light posture. So as we've talked about in previous meetings, these sensory motor amnesia develops through two mechanisms which can work synergistically. So, but both are not necessary. Either one can produce sensory motor amnesia independently, but they typically are going to work together. So the first one is through a kind of shock, a trauma. Well, trauma, we're using that word in a different way. So we'll just say through a shock, a high intensity event. And so, if somebody is in a, so Hannah observed, he kind of developed this work in part, but because he was a philosophy professor, and he was a philosopher, and he, at one point, he went and studied or lived in other parts of the world, and he studied the people, and he noticed that in different places, the people held themselves in different ways, and he thought this was very interesting, and he saw some correlations. And so in people in places where people had been exposed to the terror of war, there's a lot more red light posture. So so there can be, because of intense events, we could experience that withdrawal, and if we never learn to release it, that can just become a chronic thing. And then it becomes more and more reinforced, of course, because we're practicing it. So the habit is established. But we can also develop red light posture or any kind of habit just simply through repetition. So that's, again, why even if you don't fall victim of the cultural influence of fear, then if you sit at a desk all day, or if you sit on your couch all day, or all of these things that promote this red light posture, that habit alone can establish the sensory motor amnesia, because you use it or lose it. Because remember, we're talking about it's not about the muscles themselves. The muscles have the tension in them, but as you'll recall from past meetings, the muscles aren't doing that on their own. They're doing that because they're instructed moment to moment to do that by the nervous system. So this habit is developed in the nervous system, and then the muscles are just following suit. Okay, so that's red light. So we've kind of covered that one. You get a sense of what that feels like. Oh, but let me say so whether or not the posture is initially established due to the fear or the shock or the intensity of some kind of fear that promotes that withdrawal, even if it's established just simply by the habit of sitting at a computer, what it will do is it will still tend to produce the kinds of experiences that we would associate with that shock of withdrawal. So we'll tend to feel a sense of doom and dread and gloom and a lack of agency and fear, maybe anxiety, apprehension, worry, these sorts of things, because this posture is feeding back into the nervous system exactly what the nervous system, from an evolutionary standpoint, for billions of years has associated with those kinds of experiences. And so many times the way in which if a person is stuck in certain ways of feeling and perceiving, those can actually be the result of the sensory motor amnesia. In this case, I'm demonstrating red light posture. So next, let's talk about green light posture. So green light posture is, in a sense, it's the opposite of red light posture. So red light posture is all about flexion. If you know your terms, that's the contraction on the front side of the body. Green light posture is all about extension. So it's the contraction happens on the back side of the body. So in order to have a true green light posture, just a pure green light posture, you have to have the front side of the body has to open, and the back side is contracted. So try that out. You want to now roll the shoulders back, so you get what's called external rotation in the arms. So your hands will actually rotate outward, your thumbs will go back, and you feel the whole arm rotating, both of them. So your shoulder blades are squeezing, and you'll feel your lower back is arching. So your pelvis actually tilts forward. So it's called an anterior tilt. And if you were standing, then your legs would also exteriorly rotate. So your butt muscles would squeeze and externally rotate your legs. So then you can relax that, but just get a sense of what that feels like. So, what is that like? That's like, you can't sit still, you can't be comfortable, you can't be here, you got to go, you got to do. There's always something you got to be doing. Oh, so you want to not be doing that all the time. And along with that, of course, comes all of the kinds of things that are associated with like a type A personality. Things like lower back pain, or just back pain in general, a lot of hip problems. But hip problems could also be due to red light posture, but you could have hip problems due to either one. So, and knee and foot problems, all these things stem from this green light posture. So green light posture, I don't think we need to go into a whole lot of detail, because you kind of can get a sense of it, especially based on the analysis of the red light posture. So you can understand that in green light posture, you get a sense of what that feels like and what kinds of feelings, emotions, and thoughts and perceptions would be associated with that. You just kind of get a sense of that. So now, third reflex is the trauma reflex. So trauma reflex is the side bending or rotation. So it's going to be one side or the other. Okay. So whereas red light is the contraction on the front side of the body, so it's all flexion. Green light is all extension, but trauma reflex is one side or the other. So it's going to be left or right. So with the trauma reflex is, so he called it trauma reflex because it's about and you want to think about this in a, remember Hannah was a philosopher, but this has practical value. So we want to understand red light is, you can't escape. So you perceive there's a threat, but you can't escape. So you withdraw. Green light is, in a sense, there's a threat, but you're going to escape it, right? Or you're going to go toward it. You're going to fight it, or you're going to flee, okay? So the green light is, there's still a threat. You can't be here. You can't be relaxed. You can't be present. You got to go. But because there's a threat, so you're being driven. And you think about in society, what, if people are exhibiting green light posture, they're driven. They've got to accomplish, they've got to do. But why? Because there's some sense that I can't just be here. It's not safe for me just to be here. So then trauma reflex, there's still a perceived threat, but here we actually have much more agency than in either of the others. So red light is the least agency. You basically have no agency. The best you can do is just withdraw and hope to survive. Green light is, I've got a little bit more agency, but all I can do is just go. I don't really have, I'm just driven. I have to go. I have to constantly be going. I'm constantly on. There's no other option. So it's better than red light, but not very good. Trauma reflex, however, means, oh, I can go, I can maneuver, I can go around, I can avoid, I can sidestep. Okay, so it's bending and rotating. And the, although really it's just really purely trauma reflex is just bending, because it's only when we use that in a skillful way that we can actually rotate, which we'll get to in a moment. So this trauma reflex often happens because of, unlike the red light and green light, I'm sure there could be just habitual things, like we just tend to do something, maybe because we're like using a mouse on a computer, for example, or just because we have a dominant side, we tend to do things with that side. So we will kind of tend to develop trauma reflex because of that overuse of the dominance. But I would say more often than anything else, the strong, those strong trauma reflexes are due to some kind of accident or injury. So those are usually due to some strong event. It's a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Can't think of the word. Anyway, a strong event that imprints that, and then we forget. So a lot of the times it's because there, like somebody was in an accident where there was an impact from the side. I was in an accident. I had a bike accident many years ago that resulted in trauma reflex on the right side. A fall can often result in trauma reflex. So these kinds of, usually those kinds of things. And apparently, I don't know this from direct experience, but I've been told by one of my teachers that trauma reflex he's seen clinically most often in athletes because they tend to do a lot, even if they don't, even if they're not, well, they tend to get injured, I guess. So, oh, and also, well, no, accidents and injuries. So like if you had a sprained ankle or broken leg or something of the sort, that can tend to also almost certainly result in trauma reflex. Okay, so now let's talk about why it matters, why you want to know, because that's kind of a lot of information, but why does this matter? Like I said, it tremendously simplifies things, because now we don't really have to care so much about knowing which muscle is doing what, and which of the hundreds of muscles is responsible for this symptom that I'm experiencing, and will I ever get to the bottom of it? All we actually have to do is address these three reflexes. I mean, ideally, we just identify which of the three reflexes is causing our symptoms, and then we address that, and we regain the sensory motor awareness, and then we're free of the symptoms. So a couple more things about this. So these reflexes are not isolated muscles. So it's not a single muscle that produces this this contraction. It's not a contraction of a single muscle, although there may be a single muscle that has the dominant contraction. But it's a whole chain of muscles. So if you think about, red light reflex, what's involved? Well, the muscles in the back of the neck, these muscles in the shoulder girdle, that mostly like pectoralis muscles that are going to roll the shoulders forward, the abdominal muscles, and there's a bunch of them. So those are the big ones, and then probably psoas and iliacus. Okay, but again, you don't really have to care what the names of the muscles are, but these are the muscles that are probably mostly involved in this pattern. But we don't have to get so in detail about which muscle is it, the pectoralis major, the pectoralis minor, is it this, there's like a dozen other little tiny muscles in there. Which one? We don't actually have to care. All we have to do is we just do, and we'll get to this in a moment, but we do the pattern, and then we slowly come out of the pattern. This is pandiculation. Similarly, with the green light, there's, oh my goodness, so many muscles involved, but we don't have to really know all those details. All we have to know is how to do the pattern and then slowly come out of it. So that's the good news. Now, one more thing about this that I want to say that's also a big time saver, and that will help you to not get sucked into unnecessary complications should you make the possible mistake of just searching on YouTube for somatic exercising, is that there's another principle here, which is that these reflexes are initiated in and held by we should say they're established in the core. So Hannah defined this notion of the somatic center, and the somatic center is the lower trunk, more or less, but that's an oversimplification. And so if you have, for example, like tendonitis in your, you've been diagnosed with tendonitis in an elbow, okay, or carpal tunnel syndrome, or something that's kind of at the periphery, or TMJ disorder, or you have chronic headaches, or knee pain or foot pain, then the way we typically think, the way we've been trained to think is, oh well, it's all mechanical. It must be in that area. It's isolated there, and unfortunately, the track record of those kinds of approaches that try to treat the symptoms in that way are pretty dismal. Don't get good results, and for a good reason, which is that if you're not addressing these reflexes, which are actually the cause, then you're never gonna successfully long-term treat the peripheral symptoms. So think about it. If you have red light reflex, so try, do that. You round the shoulders, collapse the chest forward, and your head is, now you still want to see forward, so your head comes up. So now, if you do this long enough, and you could even just put your hands on the back of your neck and feel how you can feel the tension in those muscles. They're tight. Okay, so that's going to wrap up around here. This whole part of the forehead and the scalp is going to also suffer from that tension into the cheeks and into the jaw. Okay, so you can come out of that. Now, you start to notice, okay, well, what if you have TMJ disorder, or what if you have chronic headaches, or what if you've got this pain in the back of the neck all the time? Or even if you got this stuff, shoulder stuff, and you're just constantly treating that, well, the result of that. You might get temporary relief because you find a way to do that. You get the knobby thing and you work it all out a little bit, or you go get the massage, or you lie down and you do progressive muscle relaxation, or whatever you do. You get some kind of, you put ice on it or whatever, you get some kind of temporary relief. But because you haven't addressed the core of the pattern, these very strong muscles in the core. And I'll get to what I mean by the core in a moment. So because you're going to have the wrong idea. And I want to clear that up for you, because it's not what you think. But if you don't deal with the actual reflex, so you have this problem, you're still in this red light posture all the time. Well, how are you going to not continue to have the same problem? So no matter what you do up here, you're still going to have the same, it's going to come back, because the cause of it is in the core. Similarly, if you have chronic, you've got this chronic green light reflex. By the way, you can have all three at the same time. You can have red light, green light, and trauma all at the same time. So don't think it has to be just one or the other. But if your extensor muscles are chronically tense, and you've got some knee pain, no matter what you do on the knee, whether it's exercise, you're trying to do strengthening, stretching, you're icing it, you're even a surgical intervention, physical therapy, long term, it's going to come back, because your hips can't help but be externally rotated because of these really powerful muscles of the core that are chronically holding this green light posture. So if you're trying to deal with the problem at the periphery, you're never going to solve it. So this is good news, because again, it simplifies things. Rather than chasing after all the peripheral things forever and not getting good long-term results, rather than complicating things by being concerned about trying to search for the needle in the haystack of the one out of hundreds of muscles, instead of that, you can keep it very simple, and you just bring it to the 3 reflexes and you address it at the core. So what do I mean by the core? Because normally if we think of core, we think like, core strengthening, like sit-ups or crunches or some sort of idiocy like that. If I can say that, I guess I can say that. Okay, so what you got the right kind of general area, but it's actually much bigger than that. Because if you think about it in that way, then you're just thinking about like 6-pack abs. You're not going to get the results. Instead, you need to, and here's where we're going to have a little anatomy lesson, and we're not going to get to the pandiculation talk today, I can see by looking at the time, but this is really important stuff. So I want to take the time to do this, because we're going to want you to get a clarity about what the core is, so that you can start to have some practical benefits for yourself, because this will again save you a great deal of time and unnecessary suffering and searching for things out there. So now I promise you we're not going to go into hundreds of muscles, but I want to give you just some of the core muscles and their attachments, so that you can start to get a clearer sense. And I'm going to invite you to actually palpate, to feel for these muscles in your own body, okay? So red light posture is going to be a lot of the muscles are mostly on the front side of the body, so it'd be easier to palpate for most of us. So obviously, I talked about rounding the shoulders. So place, you do either side, but place one hand on the upper chest so that your fingers are kind of feel into the shoulder a little bit. And you don't have to push hard, don't strain, but just rest the hand there so that you can feel. And then roll the shoulder forward. And you should feel a slight contraction of the muscles, and then let the shoulder relax backward. So if you do that properly, actually, that is a self-pandiculation. But again, we're not going to go into a lot of detail on that today. But do that a couple of times just so you can feel. So those muscles, the muscles involved in that actually are these pectoral muscles, which actually cover the whole chest, okay? So it's a big muscle group. And you could even spread your hand like I'm doing, and then you could even feel how, that's not gonna, you're not gonna feel it getting to its maximum contraction. So it's not gonna be like hard like a rock, hopefully. If it is hard like a rock, you know you got some serious sensory motor amnesia, and that's good news because then you can solve that. But you just feel how when you roll the shoulder forward, how it gets a little tighter, a little not as soft. And then as you let the shoulder roll back, you can feel how it lengthens and softens a little bit, hopefully. If it doesn't soften, it's just an indication of sensory motor amnesia. And you could do that on the other side if you want, or not, but just kind of get a sense. So you can feel. Now, so those muscles are, without getting into all the details, and I don't even know all the points of attachment, to be honest, but generally, there's some attachment up here, okay, up near the shoulder, and then the other attachments tend to be down on the chest, closer to the sternum, okay. So that's how when those muscle fibers shorten, they bring one end to the other end of the muscle, right? That's how it works. So that's how this rolling forward of the shoulder works. And you could even, if you are able to do so, like you could put one hand on the shoulder here and the other hand closer to the sternum on the chest. And then you could feel that when you roll the shoulder slowly back, you could actually feel how the muscle fibers lengthen. And if you send the signal with the intention to let them lengthen, you might actually feel the tissue lengthen. You might even notice that feels really nice. So that's actually just doing that can reawaken somatic awareness. Okay, so those are some of the muscles. Okay, so that's core because that's involved in this red light reflex. But perhaps more important, because it's just simply because of the power of it, is the abdominal muscles. And so we've got the rectus abdominis, which has attachments at the lower portion of the chest. So at the center of your chest, but at the lower down, okay? So some attachments there, and then the other attachments are at the pubic bone. So when you, put one hand at the lower portion of the center of the chest, and then another hand at the pubic bone, and then bring those together. So it's red light reflex, and then slowly come out of that. And you can just feel, now if you're sitting, there's not going to be a strong contraction of those muscles because it's gravity assisted to just roll forward. If you were lying down on your back and you did that, you would feel how the muscles contract, the rectus abdominis contracts. So that's what's working primarily when people do a crunch, for example. but it's much more than just what we think of as the six-pack, because the attachments are all the way up here into the lower portion of the chest and all the way down to the pubic bone. So we need to have that proper awareness, because a lot of the time what happens is the sensory motor amnesia is particularly pronounced in like in the upper portion of, or the lower portion of the rectus abdominis. So even if you feel like you've got a soft belly, which you may or may not, but even if you do have a sense that, oh, my belly's really soft, I don't have any, you think, oh, I don't have any sensory motor amnesia there, you may be very mistaken, because you might have the muscle fibers might be shortened chronically only in the upper and lower portions, or upper or lower portions of that muscle. And so when you don't have the proper awareness of the length of the muscle and the size of the muscle and where that muscle is connecting and the bones that's connecting to, your awareness is lacking, and therefore it goes undetected by you. But meanwhile, you're experiencing symptoms like you have, GERD, or you've got other digestive problems, and you don't understand what that might be. Well, could be that you've got sensory motor amnesia in this part of your rectus abdominis that you've forgotten that it even exists. Okay, but it's not just the rectus abdominis. You also have these other very powerful muscles, abdominal muscles, and so we'll talk about those. Now, you really are going to have a harder time identifying, separating them in your awareness, but because they kind of tend to work together. There's three layers of these muscles on the sides of the abdomen that kind of wrap around, and they are the internal obliques, the external obliques, and the transverse abdominis, and they're involved in side bending. I mean, not all of them do exactly all the same things, obviously, but just to give you a sense of some of what the three of them do. They're involved in side bending, rotation of the trunk, and forced exhalation. So the one way that you can just feel them is you could take your hands and you're going to put the thumbs, wrap the thumbs around the back and the rest of the fingers on the front, just below the rib cage. And so I'll just adjust the camera so you can see maybe. Okay, so you're going to just, and you don't have to squeeze hard, but just gentle, like just let the weight of the arms be taken up by just let them rest, let the arms be heavy rather than holding them up, let them be heavy. So you kind of have a little bit of pressure there. And then you can inhale and let your abdomen, both front, side, and back, expand. And then you should feel, hopefully, maybe not, but ideally you feel all that tissue softening as you inhale. And then just let the exhalation be natural, not forced. And then at the bottom of that exhalation, squeeze out the air. And you can feel, and then you can breathe, inhale. But you want to feel how those muscles tighten, those muscles work to force that contraction. So this is an interesting exercise just by itself. You could repeat that a few times. And you might notice that if you do it with the proper intention and awareness, that when you squeeze that exhalation, you feel the muscles contract, you feel them get harder. And then when you inhale, let the inhalation be relaxed. Don't try to do that, but just, well, now that I've inhaled, you squeeze it out. And then just let the inhalation be passive. And let the tissue then under your hands be soft. So that gives you more awareness of those muscles. So all of those are kind of the big muscles involved. Well, there's also the psoas and the iliacus that are involved, but is a little bit more difficult, I think, to get a good, clear sense of for today, and we're near the end of our time. But those some of the major muscles involved in red light. Okay, so now you kind of get a sense when I'm talking about core, it's a much bigger region than you think of when you think of, six-pack abs. Okay, and briefly, because we don't have a lot of time today, but briefly, you could also get a sense of the muscles on the back. So these extensor muscles on the back, if you can put your hands on the back side, and I don't know if you can't do it without strain, then don't do it. But if you can manage to get your hands on your lower back, and then you can arch the back, and you feel how those muscles tighten a little bit. So it's actually all along the back. If you can get your hand up, high enough, those muscles, there are a whole bunch of them. I don't even know the names of all of them, but they run all the way up the spine, and some of them actually connect. Some of them are very short muscles, and some of them are very long muscles that run all the way from the top of the trunk all the way down and connect to the sacrum. So you got a lot of muscles in there, but they contract to shorten the back so that it arches. And then you also, and a lot of people would not necessarily consider these to be core muscles, but I am certain that they are the latissimus dorsi, which it connects to the arm, high up on the arm, and then it covers pretty much the whole back. So it connects from the arm, and then it spreads out, and it connects to the spine, and all the way down the spine, and then all the way down to the pelvis. And so that muscle is, you can, if you take your arm up like this, and then you pull down and back, that's not exclusively the latissimus dorsi, but that's a big part of that is the latissimus dorsi. So you can start to feel how the upper arm is coming closer to the pelvis. And the pelvis, you could even arch the lower back on that one side, and then you feel how that latissimus dorsi is working. So this is, if you do it properly, it's what's called a self-pendiculation, which again, we can't really go into detail on today, but we'll leave that for the next time. But that actually produces a little bit of a rotation. So obviously that's all working in consort. The rotation involves all of these cores. So that's involves the obliques and the transverse abdominis. And then in this case, we're also using the latissimus dorsi. So you start to see that all of these muscles of the trunk are working together to produce these movements, these movement patterns. So when we use these what I would call optimal somatic exercises, then we intentionally use the whole pattern. We go into the pattern, and then we use a pendiculation to slowly come out of the pattern, which allows us to regain awareness of how to have voluntary control over those muscles and how to properly sense the activity of the muscles so that we can release the unnecessary tension. So with all of that in mind, if you wanted to, say, well, a couple of things. So one is I intend to start to do a more practical, to make these meetings, now we've covered a lot of the basics over the last couple of weeks. I want to take more time in these meetings to do more practical, optimal somatic exercises. And So that will address these main reflexes, and we'll get a lot more clarity on them and get into a lot more detail so that you can start to have good success with them. So in future meetings, keep that in mind, that we'll be aiming to do practical explorations of somatic, optimal somatic exercises. And so what that means is you should come wearing loose fitting, comfortable clothing. And I will do my best, because I understand people are going to have different levels of ability to voluntarily move and all of these sorts of things. So I'll do my best to provide modifications so that they can be done seated or standing or any number of different ways. However, for some of them, if it's possible for you to lie down, you may get the best results, because you'll be able to do the pandiculations with the assistance of gravity, which is helpful. It's easier in most cases than trying to do self-pandiculations. But we'll talk about that in more detail so you can learn how to get results regardless of what your starting point is. And I definitely am aware of the wide range of abilities and disabilities and whatever else that people are dealing with. So I will do my very best to provide modifications and instructions for how you can do these pandiculations, whether it's gravity assisted or not. But if it's possible for you, then I'm just giving you this information so that you can come prepared next time. Wear loose fitting, comfortable clothing. And if it's possible for you to lie down and to change positions lying down, then be prepared for that. And so have a good surface for that, which means that you want a firm, flat surface that's padded, but not overly padded. So something that's going to be reasonably comfortable for you, but that will allow you to move and still and have a good amount of feeling. And as time goes on, maybe, well, some props could be helpful, like some if you want to bring some paperback books so that you could have head support under different in different postures. That might also be helpful. Is there anything else? No, I think that's it. So next week we will, the other thing I wanted to say is, if you wanted to get started though, given all the information that we've covered in the last 3 meetings, you have enough information that you could begin to make some use of the lessons in Thomas Hanna's book, Somatics. So you could start to try those out, but if you find they're too challenging for you, because I understand some of them are too challenging for people to figure out how to even get into the starting positions, then we'll be addressing that in the meeting. So don't dismay if you find they're too difficult. But if you have the book and you want to start to try them, then you would be welcome to, but using the principles that we've covered in these meetings. And then we'll get into more detail and more practical exploration in the next meeting next week. So, and no, that's it for now. So that's it. Thank you so much. Blessings to you all. And if you have any questions or anything that come up between now and then, let me know. And I'll see you next time. Bye for now.